The evening sky melted into shades of rose and gold, the last light of the sun resting gently on the quiet street. Inside a small suburban home, the soft hum of the dishwasher filled the air, blending with the faint echo of laughter that still lingered from dinner. Emma stood by the window, her hands resting on the counter as she watched the day fade away. The plates were stacked, the table cleared, yet something about the silence after everyone left felt heavy like a secret, waiting to be remembered. Family dinners had always been important to her. They reminded her of warmth, of connection, of the simple beauty of people sharing a meal. Tonight had been special, not for what was said, but for what WSN single quotes T. her son Luke had sat across from her, quietly eating his mashed potatoes, occasionally smiling at one of her gentle jokes. Her ex-husband Mark had joined them too. His first dinner at the house in almost 2 years. It had been Luke's idea, and though Emma hesitated at first, she couldn't say no when she saw the excitement in her son's eyes. Now, the house felt too still, too calm, as if the laughter and conversation had been borrowed from another life, one that Emma wasn't sure she still belonged to. She walked into the living room, pausing by the old family photo on the wall. It was from a time when everything felt certain, when mornings were filled with shared coffee and quiet smiles, when Luke was small enough to sit on Mark's shoulders during walks in the park. Emma traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip, a habit she didn't realize she still had. It wasn't that she missed Mark exactly. What she missed was what they used to be. A family with unspoken comfort, with soft routines that made life feel steady and known. Lately, life had felt quieter than she ever imagined it could. Work, errands, dinners for two. Her and Luke. She smiled often, because mothers do. But there were nights she sat awake long after Luke had gone to bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if life would always feel like something half-finished. Sometimes she caught herself missing things she thought she'd forgotten. The sound of laughter drifting from another room, the warmth of another voice saying goodnight, the small, simple comfort of being known. And though she never said it out loud, a small, hidden part of her still wondered if she had closed the door too quickly. Not just on Mark, but on a part of herself that once believed in second chances. The clock ticked softly on the wall. She could hear Luke moving around upstairs, probably getting ready for bed. He was 14 now, tall, thoughtful, with a kindness that reminded her of both herself and the man she once loved. Emma smiled faintly as she sat down on the couch. The cushions dipped gently beneath her, and she exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The evening air drifted in through the open window, carrying the scent of rain on its way. There was something healing about it, the way. The breeze moved through the curtains like a whisper, reminding her that the world still breathed quietly around her. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. A message from her sister, just checking in. "Dinner go well?" Emma typed back quickly. "Better than I expected." She stared at those words for a moment before hitting send. It wasn't a lie. Dinner had gone well. Almost strangely well. Mark had been kind, careful with his words, asking about Luke's classes, complimenting Emma's cooking like old times. For a few hours, it had felt almost normal. And that normalcy scared her, because deep down, she'd learned to live without it. She had built her peace slowly, piece by piece. She didn't want old feelings to come knocking on the quiet she'd worked so hard to find. But still, there was something about the way Mark had looked at her as he left, a softness in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something but chose not to. Emma tried to shake it off. She picked up a small candle from the table, lit it, and let its glow fill the dim room with a golden hush. The light danced against the framed pictures. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary mornings, all frozen moments of a life that once felt unbreakable. "Mom?" Luke's voice broke the silence. She looked up to see him standing at the foot of the stairs, barefoot, holding a blanket around his shoulders. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not really. I was just thinking about tonight." Emma smiled. "It was nice, wasn't it?" "Yeah," he said, stepping closer. "But there's something I think you should know." Emma tilted her head, curiosity flickering behind her calm expression. Luke hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad told me something before he left, and I think you should hear it." The candle flickered slightly, its flame dancing as if it too sensed the shift in the air. Emma's heart gave a quiet, steady thump, not of fear, but of something she hadn't felt in a long time. The faint spark of wonder about what tomorrow might bring. That night, long after Luke had gone to bed, Emma sat by the window again. The candle had burned down to a pool of wax, its scent of vanilla soft in the air. Outside, rain had begun to fall, slow and steady, tapping against the glass like a patient reminder of time passing. Luke's words kept circling in her mind. "Dad told me something before he left." He hadn't said more, not yet. She hadn't asked. There would be time for that tomorrow. But the thought of it opened a quiet door inside her, one that led her back to a place she hadn't visited in years. It was a memory she thought had settled like dust, peaceful, forgotten, harmless. Yet tonight, it stirred again. She remembered the first time she met Mark. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No sudden spark, no whirlwind. Just two people crossing paths on an ordinary day. She had been helping at a small community event, a spring fundraiser at the town library. Mark had been there to deliver boxes of donated books. He had a calm way of speaking, polite and steady, with a smile that reached his eyes. She'd been busy arranging the tables, but when he offered to help lift a heavy box, she noticed the kindness in his voice. "Careful," she'd said, brushing dust off the old covers. He smiled. "Guess these books have seen more life than I have." It wasn't flirting, just two strangers sharing an easy laugh. But sometimes it's the small moments that leave quiet marks. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other often, at the local cafe, at the market, on the same morning bus to work. Their conversations began with simple things: weather, books, plans for the weekend. Yet beneath the small talk was something unspoken, something that grew without either of them naming it. Emma remembered how he'd always hold the door for her, or how he'd pause mid-sentence when she smiled, as though trying to remember that moment a little longer. There was never a confession, not even a hint of what would come. Love, she later realized, often begins that way, softly, through ordinary days that slowly start to mean more than they should. When they finally shared their first dinner together, just coffee and pie at a quiet corner cafe, it had felt like home. She had never told him that, but she remembered thinking it. The way he'd listened, the way he asked questions not just to fill silence, but to understand. It all felt safe. Over the years, their life built itself piece by piece. Morning routines, shared laughter, small disagreements about groceries, and Sunday walks when the world felt too busy. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Until somewhere along the way, time and distance began to whisper between them. Mark's job grew demanding, long hours that stretched into weekends. Emma, caught between work and motherhood, began to feel the weight of doing everything on her own. Conversations grew shorter, not colder, just quieter, like music fading from another room. Sometimes she wondered when exactly they had stopped seeing each other, even while standing in the same kitchen. And yet she never stopped caring. She'd still make his favorite soup when he came home tired, still remember to pick up his favorite cereal from the store. But love, she learned, doesn't fade in a single day. It drifts, like smoke after a flame has burned too long. Then came the day they decided to part. It wasn't anger that ended it, just silence. Two people looking at each other, realizing they didn't know how to fix what they no longer understood. She had cried that night, quietly, so Luke wouldn't hear. Not because she wanted to change the past, but because she missed the feeling of being seen. The small moments that had once made life feel full. Now. Years later, sitting in her quiet living room, she could still hear the echoes of that laughter, still remember the light in Mark's eyes when he used to tease her about her endless lists, or her morning coffee rituals. She sighed softly, tracing invisible circles on the window pane with her fingertip. The rain outside had softened to a mist. Sometimes, she thought, life doesn't take things away. It just tucks them into corners of the heart, waiting for the right night to be remembered. She glanced toward the hallway where Luke's room was. He was growing fast, too fast. In him, she often caught glimpses of Mark, the same thoughtful eyes, the same quiet smile. Maybe that was why tonight felt different. Maybe Luke had sensed something she had tried to ignore, that no matter how far time carried her, part of her still cared. Emma leaned back against the chair, closing her eyes. She wasn't ready to revisit the past fully, but she couldn't deny its quiet pull either. Outside, the clouds began to part, and the moonlight fell gently on the garden, the one she and Mark had once planted together. Half of it had gone wild now, yet a few flowers still bloomed stubbornly near the fence. She smiled faintly. Some things, like love, had a way of surviving even after being forgotten. And as the rain faded to silence, Emma whispered into the night, not to anyone, but to the memory itself, "I hope you're doing well, wherever you are." It wasn't regret. It wasn't longing. Just a small, peaceful truth that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The next morning arrived quietly. The rain had cleared, leaving the world washed and bright. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and the air carried that clean scent of beginnings. Emma stood by the counter, making pancakes as Luke hurried around gathering his school things. The warmth of the pan, the gentle hiss of batter meeting heat, it all felt like her usual morning rhythm. But her mind was far from calm. Luke's words from the night before still lingered. "Dad told me something. I think you should know." She hadn't asked for more. Maybe because she was afraid of what it might stir. Just as she placed the last pancake on Luke's plate, he looked up at her with that same thoughtful gaze she'd learned to read since he was small. "Mum," he said gently, "Dad said he might stop by today. He forgot his jacket last night." Emma froze for a heartbeat, spatula still in her hand. "Oh," she said softly. "I see." Luke smiled innocently. "You don't mind, do you?" She managed a small, calm smile. "Of course not." But the moment Luke left for school, the house felt different. She tried reading, cleaning, even watering the plants. But every sound, a car door outside, footsteps on the sidewalk, made her heart flutter just a little faster than she wanted to admit. When the knock finally came, it was gentle. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door. There he was. Mark. He looked almost the same, maybe a little older, a little more tired, but there was still that familiar steadiness in his eyes. He held his jacket awkwardly, as if uncertain what to say. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey," she replied, her voice just as soft. He hesitated before stepping inside. The moment felt oddly fragile, like opening a box of old photographs. "You're not sure you're ready to see?" "I just came to grab this," he said, lifting the jacket slightly. "Sure," she said. "It's right where you left it." He smiled faintly, and for a second, it felt like years hadn't passed at all. They stood there in the kitchen, the morning light stretching between them like something alive. Mark glanced around. The same curtains, the same coffee mug by the sink. You kept the place just like it used to be, he said softly. Emma shrugged. Didn't see much reason to change it. He nodded, his gaze lowering for a moment. It still feels like home. The words hung in the air, gentle but heavy. Emma didn't know how to respond, so she poured herself another cup of coffee and gestured toward the pot. You want some? He hesitated, then smiled. Sure, why not? They sat at the table, the same one they'd shared countless breakfasts over. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of the spoon stirring coffee filled the silence. Finally, Mark looked up. Luke's growing fast. You've done an amazing job, Em. She smiled softly at the nickname, one she hadn't heard in years. Thanks, he's a good kid. He's a lot like you, Mark said. Quiet, thoughtful. Always watching, always caring more than he lets on. Emma's eyes softened. And a bit like you too. He still believes in people. Mark chuckled gently. Guess he got the best of both of us. For a moment their laughter mingled, quiet, genuine, familiar. And in that moment the years between them seemed to fade. Emma noticed the way he looked at her then, not with longing, but with a kind of tenderness that only time and forgiveness can create. I've thought about reaching out, Mark said after a pause, but I didn't want to make things harder. I wasn't sure if you'd even want to talk. Emma looked down at her coffee, the steam curling upward like a whisper. I wasn't sure either, she said honestly. But maybe some things aren't as hard as we imagine. He nodded, his gaze soft. Maybe not. They sat there quietly, letting the conversation rest. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing sunlight against the window. Mark stood after a moment, slipping his jacket over his arm. I should let you get back to your day. Emma nodded. Thanks for stopping by. As he reached the door, he turned back once more. It was good to see you, Em. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. You too, Mark. When the door closed behind him, the house felt both emptier and lighter. She leaned against the counter, her hand still warm from the coffee cup. Something inside her, something quiet and cautious, felt awake again. Not in the way of romance or promises, but in the way hope sometimes reappears when you least expect it. That night, Luke came home cheerful. Dad said he might come by again next week, he said, almost casually. Emma looked up from the stove, her expression unreadable but calm. Did he? Luke nodded. He said maybe you two could talk, just as friends. Emma smiled, her voice steady and kind. Maybe we could. As Luke ran upstairs, she stood for a moment, looking out at the twilight sky. The light was fading, but it was beautiful, soft and golden, like a memory choosing to stay. And though she couldn't yet name the feeling, she knew something had quietly shifted inside her. The past hadn't returned to claim her heart. It had simply reminded her that it still existed. The following weekend arrived with soft sunlight and the kind of calm that made the air feel new again. The garden shimmered with the afterglow of rain, and the trees outside. Emma's window swayed gently in the morning breeze. She was preparing breakfast when Luke came downstairs, his backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. Dad said he'd pick me up for the museum trip today, he said, smiling. Emma nodded. That sounds nice. Don't forget your water bottle. Luke grinned, kissed her cheek, and hurried out the door. A few minutes later, there was a light knock, the kind that carried a memory. Emma opened the door to find Mark standing there, dressed casually, a warmth in his smile that wasn't forced this time. Morning, he said. Morning, she replied. Luke's just grabbing his shoes. He'll be right out. He nodded, then looked around, his gaze pausing on the flowers near the porch. You kept the garden, he said quietly. She smiled. Some of it. The rest had a mind of its own. They both chuckled softly. The kind of shared laughter that comes from remembering who used to be. When Luke ran out a moment later, he waved quickly before jumping into the car. Mark lingered, glancing back toward Emma. I'll have him home by 6, he said. Take your time, she replied. And as the car pulled away, the quiet settled again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, like the pause before a melody begins again. That evening when Luke returned, he was full of stories. About the museum, the exhibits, the ice cream afterward. But somewhere between his excited words, Emma noticed something else. He was watching her carefully. Mum, he said finally, Dad wants to talk to you. He's waiting outside. Her heart gave a gentle thud. Right now? Luke nodded. He said just for a minute. Emma took a slow breath, then stepped out into the soft glow of dusk. Mark was standing by his car, hands in his pockets, the fading sunlight catching in his hair. Hey, he said quietly. Hey, she replied, her voice steady but gentle. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the evening, birds settling, leaves rustling, filled the space between them. Finally, Mark exhaled, his words slow and careful. I didn't come to make things complicated. I just needed to say something I should have said a long time ago. Emma watched him, her expression calm, her eyes kind. I know I made mistakes, he continued. I got lost in work, in pride, in everything that didn't matter. And I let go of the one thing that did. You and Luke were home. I just forgot how to be there. The honesty in his voice didn't come with expectation, only sincerity. Emma felt her chest tighten. For years, she'd imagined what she might say if this moment ever came. But now, words felt unnecessary. I don't know if I deserve another chance, Mark went on. And maybe that's not even what this is about. I just wanted you to know. I never stopped caring. Not once. The air hung still between them, soft and golden in the twilight. Emma's eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with something gentle, understanding. Mark, she said finally, her tone quiet but sure. We both made mistakes. But we also built something good. And maybe that's what matters most. That we loved, that we tried, and that we still care enough to stand here now. He nodded slowly, emotion tightening his smile. You've always been stronger than me. She smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe we just grew different in the quiet. They stood there for a while, not as exes or strangers, but as two people who had shared a life, a child, and years that had shaped who they became. As the sky deepened into a soft blue, Mark glanced at the porch light beginning to glow. Luke's lucky to have you, he said. I'm lucky too for all of it, even the hard parts. Emma stepped closer, just enough to meet his gaze. Then maybe we both learned something, that love doesn't always have to stay the same, to still be real. He smiled, a quiet peace settling between them. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. For a long moment, they simply stood there. The sound of crickets in the distance, the soft hum of the evening holding them in place. Finally, Mark stepped back toward the car. Good night, Em. Good night, Mark, she said, her voice steady, kind, and full of something almost new. She watched as he drove away, the taillights fading into the dusky road. When she turned back toward the house, Luke was standing by the doorway, his expression thoughtful. Everything okay? He asked softly. Emma nodded. Yes, everything's just peaceful. He smiled. You look happy. She reached out, brushing his hair gently. Maybe I am. They went inside, the house warm and calm again. Emma glanced at the old family photo on the shelf, the one she hadn't moved in years. For the first time, it didn't make her sad. Instead, it reminded her of all the chapters that had shaped her. Love, loss, forgiveness, and the quiet courage of beginning again. She sat down beside Luke, their laughter mingling softly as the evening turned to night. And in her heart, she knew something certain. Love didn't always need to return to be real. Sometimes it just needed to be remembered, accepted, and set free with grace.